If there's one thing nobody prepares you for, it's how heavy a uniform feels at a funeral. Not the fabric, not the metals, not the weight of the boots, the weight of eyes. The way every glance seems to ask two questions at once. Who did you become while we weren't looking? And who do you think you are to show up like that? I felt all of that before I even reached the church steps. The sky was an uncommitted gray. Too bright to be dramatic and too dull to be comforting. The kind of day that sits on your chest instead of the horizon. The old stone church where my grandmother had sung in the choir for 40 years looked smaller than I remembered, the stained glass windows dim without the sun. A cluster of my relatives stood near the entrance, dressed in a spectrum of black that ranged from funeral appropriate to this was on sale last week. I parked across the street and killed the engine. For a moment I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, heartbeat loud in the quiet cabin. My reflection stared back at me from the rearview mirror. Dark brown skin, tight bun at the nape of my neck, eyes rimmed with a tiredness that went bone deep. My uniform was impeccable. Jacket pressed, medals aligned, rank on my shoulders exactly where it should be. Captain. I still felt the promotion every time I put the uniform on, like my spine adjusted itself a little taller to match the stripes. Okay, Amara, I murmured to myself. In. Hug the aunts. Avoid the uncles as long as possible. Don't cry until they close the casket. Breathe. I stepped out of the car and the air hit me, cool and damp. As I crossed the street, a few heads turned. Recognition flickered. The double take people do when they see a woman in uniform, then the triple take when they realize she's black and the rank on her shoulders isn't the lowest one. My Uncle Victor saw me first. Of course it had to be him. He was standing near the church doors with a cigarette cupped in one hand like a secret. The other hand rested on his stomach, a casual ownership of the space in front of him. He'd always been like that, taking up room, filling silence before anyone else could get a word in. When I was a kid, I'd thought he was the funniest man alive. As an adult, I knew better. He wasn't funny. He was loud, and sometimes loud passes for funny if nobody tells the truth. He turned at the sound of my boots on the pavement, eyes dragging up from my shoes to my face. For a second his expression was blank. Then his mouth stretched into a grin that didn't touch his eyes. Well, would you look at that? He said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Little Mari went and joined the costume club. A few heads swiveled. My cousin Denise winced. Aunt Carol murmured something under her breath that sounded a lot like Lord, give me strength. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. Good morning, Uncle. He flicked ash onto the ground and laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Morning? It's a funeral, girl. Nobody here having a good morning. He looked me up and down again, slower this time. So that's real, huh? Not some Halloween thing? It's real, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm home on compassionate leave. Ooh, he drawled, nudging the man next to him with his elbow. Leave. Compassionate. Hear that, Pete? Army gave our little Mari a pity pass. Air Force, I corrected automatically. He rolled his eyes. Army, Air Force, space wizards, whatever they're calling it these days. Government's government. I could feel people watching. Not just my cousins and aunts, but the older church ladies hovering near the door. The ones who had hugged me as a little girl and told me I sang just like my grandmother. Their eyes were curious, assessing. Some were proud, some were wary. A uniform does that. It divides people into those who think you're a hero and those who think you're a fool. Sometimes both. I forced a small smile. It's good to see you. He barked out another laugh. Oh, it must be. Y'all only show up for weddings and funerals now that you've got big important lives. Too busy saving the world to visit your grandma when she was asking for you. The jab hit clean. That was his specialty. Not lies. Twisted truths. I called. I said quietly. Every week when I could. I sent money for the medication when the insurance... Money. He snorted. Always think money is love. Your uniform teach you that too? Something hot flared in my chest, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time. Grandma wouldn't want a scene on her church steps, not with her body inside waiting to be honored. She'd want grace. She'd want forgiveness. But she'd also told me, more than once, "Baby, forgiveness don't mean letting folks walk on you. It just means you don't lay down to make it easier." "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to say goodbye to Grandma." He smirked. "You're here to be seen." There it was, the real resentment, finally peeking through the jokes. "You think we don't know what this is?" he went on, gesturing vaguely at my uniform. "You roll up in your shiny little outfit so the neighbors can whisper and the pastor can mention you from the pulpit. Look at our little soldier, serving the nation." He spat the last words like they tasted bad. "If you cared that much, you'd have been here when she was alive." Deep breath in, deep breath out. The trick was not letting him drag me down to the place he lived. That swamp of grievance where every good thing someone else did felt like an insult. Grandma's voice in my head again. "Don't argue with drunk men or bitter ones. They already lost a fight you can't see." "I called," I repeated, more to myself than to him. "I wrote. I served." She understood. "She made excuses for you," he snapped. Like she always did. "My Mari's doing something important." "Important?" He cursed under his breath. "Important is being here. Important is changing her sheets when she couldn't move. Important is taking her to the doctor when your car's older than your bad habits." I'd heard about that. About how he'd driven her to appointments. About how he'd complained the whole time and still showed up. About the way he'd sat beside her bed and pretended not to be scared. My mother had told me with equal parts gratitude and frustration, always adding, "He won't let me thank him without making it ugly." "Thank you," I said now, meeting his eyes. "For taking care of her. I know you did more than anyone else." For a flicker of a second, something softened in his face. Then the wall slammed back down. "Don't try to make me the villain, girl," he said. "I know your type. Go off to the military and come back thinking you better than everybody." "I don't think I'm better," I said. "Just different." "Different," he echoed. "That what they call it now?" And then, as if the script had demanded it, he laughed. Really laughed this time, head thrown back, shoulders shaking. The sound bounced off the stone facade of the church and rolled down the steps. A few people nearby chuckled nervously, the way folks do when they sense a conflict but don't want to pick a side. "Look at you," he said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Look at this girl, dressed up like a toy soldier at her grandma's funeral. You know what you look like?" I didn't answer. I already knew whatever was coming next wasn't meant to be constructive. "You look like a joke," he said. "Playing dress up while the real world does real work. You ain't nothing but a poster, a brochure. Couple more years, they'll stick your face on some billboard. Join up, kids. You too can abandon your family in a fancy suit." "Victor," Aunt Carol's voice cut through, low but sharp. "That's enough." He ignored her, eyes never leaving mine. "You know what I told your cousin when she said she was proud of you?" he went on. I said, "Proud of what? Wearing what they give you and doing what they tell you?" "There's no pride in being owned, girl. Just shame in not seeing the chains." Each word landed heavy. Not because I believed them, because I'd heard some version of them before, whispered at cookouts, muttered in barbershops, tossed like grenades in online comment sections whenever someone who looked like me put on a uniform. Traitor, sellout, government tool. I'd wrestled with those accusations in the dark, alone, long before Uncle Victor turned them into a performance on church steps. but never had anyone flung them at me directly with so much relish. I swallowed, feeling my pulse in my throat. "Are you done?" He grinned. "You can't handle a little truth, Captain?" "That's not truth," I said quietly. "That's what you tell yourself so you don't have to look at your own choices." His smile faltered. Just a hair. Enough for me to see the hurt under the bluster like a bruise under skin. "What choices?" he snapped. "You know which," I said. "But I'm not doing this with you. Not today." He stepped down one step, closing the distance between us. I could smell the cigarette smoke on his breath, the faint echo of last night's whiskey still clinging to him. "You think your little stripes mean you can talk to me like that?" he said, voice low and dangerous. "I changed your diapers, girl. I taught you to ride a bike. Don't forget where you come from, just because some man in a suit told you you're useful." "I never forgot where I come from," I said. "That's why I left." The words slipped out before I could stop them. They hung there between us, raw and honest in a way I hadn't meant to be. A hush fell over the little crowd. Even the traffic on the street seemed to dim for a second. Uncle Victor's face hardened. "There it is," he said. "There's the truth. You think you're too good for this neighborhood, this family, for us." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." "No," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What I meant is that I couldn't stay here and watch everyone give up on themselves. Grandma didn't raise me to sit on a stoop talking about what I could have been. She raised me to go find out." He scoffed. "Yeah? And what are you now? Tell me, soldier girl. What big important thing are you? Private? Sergeant? Whatever they call the peons?" "Captain," I said. He blinked. The word didn't seem to fit in his mouth. "Captain," he repeated slowly. "They promoted you for shining boots so nice?" "Victor," Aunt Carol warned again. He waved her off. "I just don't see what's so special, that's all. You press some buttons, you follow some orders, and you expect us to bow when you walk in." "I don't expect anyone to bow," I said. "I just expected basic respect at our grandmother's funeral." He barked another laugh, but it was starting to sound strained. "Respect is earned." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I've been working on it my whole life." For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then the heavy church doors creaked open behind us, and the usher poked his head out. "They're ready to bring her in," he said. "We should all take our seats." The moment broke. People shifted, murmuring condolences to each other, adjusting jackets and smoothing dresses. Aunt Carol took my hand briefly and squeezed, gratitude and apology and exhaustion all in that one gesture. "Come on, baby," she said. "Sit with us." I nodded and started up the steps. Behind me, Victor muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Walking around like you some kind of hero. You ain't no hero." The words stung, partly because some deep, insecure part of me agreed. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a woman who'd done her job, who'd followed a path that made sense to her even when it didn't to anyone else. Hero sounded like something they wrote in obituaries, not something you were allowed to claim while you were still messing up, still doubting, still human. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked into the church. Inside, the smell of old wood and hymnals wrapped around me. The casket at the front was closed, draped in a simple white cloth with a single cross embroidered in gold. A framed photo of Grandma sat atop it, her eyes crinkled at the corners, mouth mid-laugh like someone had just told a joke she'd pretend to scold them for. My chest tightened. I walked down the aisle, boots muffled by the thin red carpet, aware of every glance that followed me. Some were warm, some cool, some simply curious. I slid into the pew with my mother and cousins. My mom's hand found my knee, squeezing once, wordless comfort. "You look beautiful," she whispered, She'd be so proud. I swallowed hard. I hope so. As the service began, hymns, prayers, the familiar cadence of scripture, I let the rhythm of it settle my breathing. Memory layered over memory, sitting in these pews as a kid, swinging my legs, Grandma's hand on my shoulder when I got too fidgety, her voice singing harmony so naturally it made the hymnal feel unnecessary. When it was time for remembrances, several people stood. The pastor, an old friend from the choir, a neighbor who'd lived across the hall for 30 years. They told stories of her cooking, her stubbornness, her kindness. They made everyone laugh and cry as required by funeral law. Then the pastor said, "If anyone else would like to say a few words, the floor is open." I felt my mother's hand tighten on my knee. "You want to?" she whispered. My throat closed. Part of me wanted to stand and talk about how Grandma had taught me to shine my shoes and keep my word, how she'd walked me to the recruitment office and told the recruiter, "If you waste her time, I'll come back and waste yours." How she'd kept a map on her wall with pins marking every place I'd been stationed. Another part of me wanted to sink into the pew and stay invisible. Before I could decide, someone else stood. Uncle Victor. He shuffled down the aisle, shoulders squared with a kind of swagger that had no place at the front of a church. The pastor looked surprised, but stepped aside anyway. Victor cleared his throat and leaned into the mic. His voice came through the speakers slightly distorted. "Most of you know me," he said. "I'm Victor, her youngest boy, the trouble one." People chuckled. He knew how to get a crowd. Ma was... He paused, eyes shining, and for the first time that day, I saw genuine grief break through. Ma was everything. She'd fight you and feed you in the same breath. She didn't take no nonsense, but she'd take your burdens if you let her. She was tough on us, but she loved us hard. He talked about her cornbread, her stubbornness, the time she'd chased the landlord down 3 flights of stairs for trying to raise the rent on her babies. People laughed, nodded, murmured yes, Lord under their breath. This was the version of him they loved, the storyteller, the one who turned pain into punchlines. Then his gaze flicked to me. "And she loved all her grandbabies," he said, "even the ones that left." There it was, the pivot. "She used to sit right there by that window," he went on, pointing, waiting for the mailman, hoping there'd be a letter. And when there was, she'd hold it like it was a trophy. "My Mari wrote me," she'd say. His voice dipped into a mocking falsetto that made my fists clench. "Always talking about what big things you were doing in that uniform." People shifted uncomfortably. The pastor's brow furrowed. "But she never said this part," he said, and his tone sharpened. "She never said how she cried when she saw them news reports, worried sick. She never said how she wished, just once, you'd walk through that door in regular clothes, sit at her table, and let her pretend you were just her little girl again instead of some government robot." "Victor," the pastor said gently, "let's..." He talked over him. "She made you into some kind of hero in her head, Mari. Living legend, that's what she called you once. You know that? My girl's a living legend." He laughed bitterly. "But legends don't change bedpans. Legends don't show up when the nurse calls at 3 a.m. Legends send postcards and call twice a month when the Wi-Fi's working." My vision blurred. I could feel every eye in the church on me now, the burn of being made a spectacle. "She deserved better than a legend," he said. "She deserved a granddaughter, a flesh and blood person who could sit there and hold her hand instead of some picture on the wall in a uniform. So you forgive me if I don't clap when you walk in here like some movie star. You ain't no hero to me. You're just someone who left." The silence after that was thick, suffocating. The pastor stepped in quickly, hand on Victor's shoulder, guiding him away from the mic. "Thank you, Brother Victor," he said, voice tight. "Grief speaks loud sometimes. We appreciate your honesty and your love for your mother." Victor shrugged him off and walked back down the aisle. As he passed our pew, he didn't look at me. My mother's hand gripped mine so hard it hurt. Her jaw was clenched, eyes bright with angry tears. "He had no right," she whispered. "No right to put you on blast like that." I sat there, heartbeat pounding in my ears, shame and fury and grief warring in my chest. Was he wrong? No, not entirely. I hadn't been there as much as I wanted. The military had taken my time, my presents, my holidays. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, quiet Tuesdays when she'd wanted company. I'd sent money and letters and voice notes, but I hadn't been there. But I'd also been in places I couldn't tell them about, doing things they'd never understand. Not because I wanted glory, but because someone had to. Because the world didn't stay safe on its own. Because the job I'd chosen asked too much, and I'd said yes anyway. Living legend. I hadn't known she'd called me that. The phrase lodged in my throat like a stone. My eyes burned, but I forced the tears back. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. As the pastor moved the service along, something settled inside me. Not calm, not yet. Something more like resolve. A clarity I didn't ask for but couldn't ignore. I had spent my entire career fighting to be seen as more than a symbol, more than a statistic. In uniform, I was the exception to two rules: black and woman in spaces that had been built without me in mind. At home, I was something else entirely, the one who left, the one who chased a dream that didn't include the block we grew up on. In both worlds, people wrote stories about me without asking for my input. Maybe it was time to tell my own. I didn't know yet that before the day was over, someone far more powerful than my uncle would stand in front of this same congregation and say words that would rip the narrative right out of his hands. I didn't know yet that a man whose face I'd only ever seen on the news would look me in the eye and call me something my grandmother had whispered in private. Living legend. All I knew, sitting there in that pew with my fists clenched and my heart pounding, was that I had a choice: shrink to fit the version of me that made other people comfortable, or stand up and let them see the whole truth, even if it made them look small. For the first time that day, I felt something like Grandma's hand on my shoulder again, steadying, urging, "Don't lay down, baby. Not today." I took a breath, straightened my back, and waited for my moment. The service ended the way funerals always do: slow, heavy, and with the lingering sense that words could never quite hold what had been lost. The pallbearers, my cousins and a few family friends, lifted Grandma's casket with careful reverence and carried her down the aisle. The organ played something mournful and familiar, something she'd probably hummed 1,000 times while washing dishes or folding laundry. My mother stood beside me, gripping my hand so tightly I could feel her pulse through her palm. I didn't look at Uncle Victor as we filed out. Outside, the clouds had thickened. The air smelled like rain waiting to happen. People gathered on the lawn and the sidewalk, clustering in small groups, voices low and respectful. Some headed toward their cars to join the procession to the cemetery. Others lingered, trading stories, checking phones, doing the things people do when grief loosens its grip just enough for life to slip back in. I stood near the church steps, not quite part of any group, trying to decide if I should find my mother or disappear into my car until the burial. That's when I heard the engine. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Smooth, expensive, the kind of sound that signaled authority before you even saw the vehicle. A black SUV rolled up to the curb, windows tinted, no markings except a small flag decal on the front fender. Government issue, unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time on base. The passenger door opened first, and a woman in a dark suit stepped out. She scanned the crowd with the efficient gaze of someone trained to assess threats in under 3 seconds. Then she nodded to someone inside the vehicle. The back door opened, and out stepped a man I'd only ever seen in briefings, news conferences, and official photographs mounted on walls in buildings I needed 3 levels of clearance to enter, The Honorable Marcus Hale, United States Secretary of Defense. The crowd didn't recognize him immediately. Why would they? This was a small church in a working-class neighborhood where most folks were more concerned with next month's rent than next year's defense budget. But a few people closer to the curb noticed the suits, the posture, the unmistakable aura of someone who moved through the world expecting doors to open. I froze. Secretary Hale was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his close-cropped hair. He wore a dark suit that fit like it had been tailored in a room where they didn't ask the price. His face was composed, solemn, appropriate for a funeral. But his eyes, sharp, assessing, swept the crowd until they landed on me. He smiled. Not a political smile, something warmer. Recognition. And then he walked directly toward me. My brain stuttered. This wasn't possible. The Secretary of Defense didn't just show up at random funerals. He didn't appear unannounced on church lawns in neighborhoods like this. There were protocols, schedules, security details the size of small armies. And yet here he was, cutting through the crowd like it was the most natural thing in the world. People started to notice. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" And someone else whispered back, "I don't know, but look at those suits." Uncle Victor was standing near the steps, mid-conversation with Pete. His eyes followed the secretary's path, confusion flickering across his face. When he realized the man was walking toward me, his expression shifted into something between disbelief and irritation. Secretary Hale stopped a respectful 3 feet away and extended his hand. "Captain Okoye," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by everyone nearby. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I blinked. My mouth worked, but no sound came out for a full second. Then training kicked in, some deep automatic part of me that knew how to stand at attention even when the rest of me was malfunctioning. I shook his hand. "Mr. Secretary, I wasn't expecting—" "I know," he said gently. "I apologize for the surprise. I was in the area for meetings at the state capitol, and when I heard about Mrs. Okoye's passing, I wanted to pay my respects." He glanced toward the church, then back at me. "Your grandmother raised a remarkable woman." The words hit me sideways, not because they were flattering. I'd heard compliments before, plenty of them hollow, but because he said it like he meant it, like he knew. "You knew my grandmother?" I asked, confused. "Not personally," he admitted. "But I know you, Captain, and I know the kind of foundation it takes to produce someone with your record." My record? He was talking about my service, my file, the classified operations I couldn't discuss at family dinners. Things Uncle Victor would never know about, never understand, because they existed in a world he'd decided wasn't real. Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Beside her, Aunt Carol whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" The secretary glanced past me toward the gathering crowd, acknowledging them with a small nod, then returned his attention to me. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "But I wanted to say this in person. Your work over the past 2 years, particularly the Juno operation and the Havana coordination, saved lives, Captain. A lot of them. Most people will never know the details, but I do. And I wanted you to know that your country sees you. Your service matters." Juno, Havana, classified code names I hadn't spoken out loud in months. Hearing them here on this church lawn felt like a collision of 2 universes that were never supposed to touch. I swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. That means—" My voice cracked slightly. "That means more than you know." He nodded, understanding passing between us without another word. Then he did something I didn't expect. He turned toward the crowd, his voice lifting just enough to carry across the lawn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and the murmur of conversation stopped completely. "I apologize for interrupting your gathering. I know this is a private moment of grief, and I don't mean to intrude. But I wanted to take a moment to honor someone who deserves recognition." He gestured toward me. Captain Amara Okoye is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege of working with. She has served in some of the most dangerous, sensitive operations our military conducts. Operations that require not just courage, but intelligence, integrity, and an unshakable commitment to protecting others. She has done this without fanfare, without recognition, because that's the nature of her work. Most of you will never know the specifics, and that's by design. But what you should know is this. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd, landing briefly on Uncle Victor, whose face had gone pale. Captain Okoye is a living legend in the intelligence and operations community. She has been awarded commendations I cannot name, for missions I cannot discuss, in places I cannot disclose. And she did all of this while carrying the weight of being a Black woman in spaces that were not built with her in mind. That takes a kind of strength most of us will never be asked to summon. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering so loud I was certain everyone could hear it. The secretary turned back to me, his expression softening. "Your grandmother knew," he said quietly. "Just for me. We sent her a letter 2 years ago, after the Juno operation. It was heavily redacted, but we told her that her granddaughter had done something extraordinary." She wrote back. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges like it had been read many times. He handed it to me. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grandma's careful, looping script, the kind she'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards and notes she'd tuck into my lunchbox when I was a kid. "Dear Mr. Secretary, thank you for your letter. I don't understand all the words you used, and I know you can't tell me what my Mari did. But I know this. Whatever it was, she did it because she loves people. She always has. Even as a little girl, she couldn't stand to see anyone hurt or left behind. That's why she joined. Not for glory, not for medals, because she wanted to help. I'm proud of her every single day, not because she's important, but because she's good. Don't let the uniform make you forget she's still my baby. Take care of her, please. She won't ask for help, even when she needs it. With gratitude, Eleanor Okoye." The words blurred. My throat closed completely. I could see her sitting at her kitchen table, reading that letter over and over, trying to decode the redacted lines, imagining what I'd done. Worrying. Praying. Proud. And I hadn't known. "She kept this letter on her refrigerator," the secretary said softly. "When I heard about her passing, I asked my staff to retrieve it for you. I thought you should have it." I couldn't speak. I nodded, clutching the letter like it was the last piece of her I'd ever hold. The secretary straightened, his voice returning to its public register. "Mrs. Eleanor Okoye raised a hero," he said to the crowd, "and this community should know that. You should all be very proud." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Not awkward. Just stunned. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. It was my mother. Tears streaming down her face, hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Aunt Carol joined her, then Denise, then the pastor, then more and more people until the sound filled the air, tentative at first, then building into something solid and real. I stood there, overwhelmed, as the crowd I'd felt so alienated from an hour ago now looked at me with something I hadn't expected. Pride. Real pride. Not the hollow, performative kind. The kind that said, "You're ours, and we see you now." Uncle Victor stood frozen near the steps, his face a complicated mess of emotions I couldn't parse. Shock. Disbelief. Something that might have been shame. Secretary Hale shook my hand once more. Take care of yourself, Captain. The nation needs you. But more than that, he glanced toward my mother, toward Grandma's casket being loaded into the hearse. Your family needs you too. Don't forget that. I won't, sir. He nodded, then turned and walked back to the SUV. His security detail moved with him, smooth and practiced. The door closed. The engine purred to life. And just like that, the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Uncle Victor's voice cut through the quiet. That was real? He said, not to me, but to no one in particular. That was the actual Secretary of Defense? Yes, Aunt Carol said, her voice sharp with something between vindication and anger. That was the Secretary of Defense, showing up to honor your niece, the one you just called a joke an hour ago. His jaw tightened. He looked at me, something raw and exposed flickering across his face before the walls went back up. You could have told us, he said, but the fight had drained from his voice. You could have said something. I couldn't, I said quietly. Most of what I do is classified. I'm not allowed to talk about it, even to family. Especially to family. So we were just supposed to guess? You were supposed to trust me, I said. The way Grandma did. That landed. I saw it hit, saw the way his shoulders sagged just slightly. My mother crossed the lawn and pulled me into a hug so fierce I felt my ribs compress. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into my hair. So proud. And your grandma. Her voice broke. She knew, baby. She always knew. I held her, the letter still clutched in my hand, and let the tears come. Not from sadness, not entirely, from relief, from the weight of being seen, finally, fully, by the people I'd spent my whole life trying not to disappoint. When we pulled apart, I noticed the crowd had started to move again, heading toward their cars for the procession to the cemetery. But the energy had shifted. People who'd barely acknowledged me before now smiled as they passed. A few reached out to touch my arm, to murmur congratulations, to say they'd had no idea. Living legend, one older woman said, shaking her head in wonder. Lord have mercy, and I just thought you were in the Army. Air Force, I corrected gently, and she laughed. Well, whatever it is, baby, you keep doing it. We're all rooting for you. As we walked toward the cars, I caught sight of Uncle Victor again. He was standing alone now, Pete having wandered off to talk to someone else. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. Like a man who'd just realized the story he'd been telling himself for years, no longer held up under scrutiny. I could have walked past him. Part of me wanted to. But Grandma's voice echoed again in my head. Steadier this time. Grace, baby. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I stopped in front of him. Uncle Victor, I said. He looked up, eyes guarded. For what it's worth, I said. You were right. I should have been here more. I should have called more. I should have found a way, and I'm sorry I didn't. He blinked, surprised. Yeah. Okay. But, I continued, voice steady. You were wrong about the rest. I'm not a joke. I'm not playing dress up. And I didn't leave because I thought I was better than you. I left because I wanted to be something I couldn't be if I stayed. And Grandma understood that. She told me once, Baby, you can't pour from an empty cup. Go fill yours. His throat worked, but he didn't speak. I'm not asking you to understand what I do, I said. But I am asking you to stop punishing me for choosing a different life than the one you think I should have had. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a truce. But it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. I turned and walked toward my mother's car, where she was waiting with the door open. As I slid into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt, She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked. I looked down at Grandma's letter, still folded carefully in my lap. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." The procession rolled out slowly, headlights on even in daylight, a line of cars moving toward the cemetery like a long, sorrowful exhale. And somewhere in the middle of it all, surrounded by family that finally saw me, I felt Grandma riding with us. Not gone, just different, just watching from a place I couldn't see yet but knew I'd get to someday. Living legend, the secretary had called me. But all I wanted to be, all I'd ever wanted to be, was someone she could be proud of. And now I knew. She was. The cemetery sat on a low hill at the edge of town. The kind of place you drove past 100 times without really seeing until you had a reason to stop. Rows of headstones marched in careful lines across the grass, some polished and new, others worn smooth by time and weather. The sky had finally made up its mind. Thin rain fell in a steady, misting curtain, not enough to soak through, just enough to turn every breath into a visible cloud. We stood around Grandma's grave under a cluster of umbrellas, the pastor's voice low and steady as he recited the familiar words over the closed casket. Dirt waited in a neat pile beside the hole, ready to finish what death had started. My boots sank slightly into the damp ground, the smell of wet earth mixing with perfume, cologne, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke still clinging to my uncle's jacket somewhere behind me. I held Grandma's letter in my gloved hand, the paper protected in a clear plastic sleeve the secretary's aide had slipped me before they left. It felt like a talisman, a bridge between the life she'd lived in this neighborhood and the world I'd stepped into beyond it. Her words sat between us now, proof that she'd seen me more clearly than anyone else. The pastor finished the prayer and closed his Bible. People murmured, "Amen," in different pitches, some strong, some breaking. The funeral director signaled to the men with the shovels, and the first clumps of dirt hit the lid of the casket with a sound that never failed to make my stomach twist. My mother squeezed my arm. "You want to put in a flower?" she whispered. I nodded and stepped forward, taking a single white lily from the arrangement nearest the grave. I'd seen this done 100 times. The symbolic goodbye, the gesture that says this is it. We're really letting you go now. My hand hovered over the open wound in the earth. "I'll see you, Grandma," I murmured, too soft for anyone else to hear. "Just from a little higher up than you expected." I dropped the flower in. It landed gently on the wet wood, a bright, fragile contrast to the dark soil building around it. Behind me, I heard the crunch of gravel, a car door closing, footsteps approaching. I assumed it was another late-arriving relative, until a familiar voice cut through the patter of rain. "Excuse me, Captain. Mind if I steal you for a minute?" I turned. Elias stood a few feet away, holding an umbrella, his uniform under a dark overcoat. For a split second, the cemetery blurred. This man, this piece of my life from a world of secure compounds and launch pads, looked impossibly out of place among the old stones and plastic flower arrangements. "You're..." I blinked. "You're supposed to be in Colorado." He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his mouth. I rerouted. My CO signed off. When the Secretary of Defense calls and says, "One of your best just lost her grandmother," people tend to find a way to make schedules flexible. "You talked to him?" I asked, startled. "Briefly," he said. "He mentioned delivering a letter. I put 2 and 2 together." "You rerouted your whole schedule for this?" "For you," he corrected quietly. "Yes." Something hot and sharp pricked behind my eyes. I blinked it back. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said, stepping closer and angling the umbrella so it covered us both. "But I wanted to. Do you want me to go? I can hang back if you need space." I shook my head. "No, stay." We stood side by side as the grave slowly filled. My mother noticed him and gave a small, grateful nod. She'd met him once, briefly, on a base visit when she'd come for a family day. At the time, he'd just been your friend from work, who happened to hover a little too close, whose eyes tracked me with too much awareness. Mothers notice these things. Now she seemed to understand without words. She stepped away to talk to the pastor, leaving us with a bubble of relative privacy beneath the umbrella. "How are you holding up?" Elias asked. I let out a breath. "Depends who you ask. According to my uncle, I'm a government robot who abandoned my family for a shiny suit. According to the Secretary of Defense, I'm a living legend. According to my mother, I'm her baby who doesn't call enough. According to me..." I shrugged. "I'm just tired." He nodded, rain tapping a soft rhythm on the umbrella above us. "Grief plus politics. It's a brutal combo." I snorted. "You heard about the speech?" "It was all over the secure channel before his car even left the neighborhood," Elias said. "You've got half the Pentagon trying to figure out who this mysterious Captain Okoye is that the SecDef just called a legend in public." Heat crept up my neck, a mix of embarrassment and something like pride. "That's not ideal." "It's complicated," he agreed. "But also, about time." "About time for what?" "For someone to say out loud what the rest of us already knew," he said simply. "You've been carrying weight not everyone could handle. It's okay to let some of the recognition in without feeling guilty." "I don't feel guilty," I lied. He raised an eyebrow. "Okay," I amended. "I feel conflicted. My uncle's not entirely wrong." "He's wrong about the parts that matter," Elias said. "Missing someone's last months because you're serving on the other side of the world. That hurts. For you and them. But it's not betrayal. It's sacrifice. And if anyone understood that, it's your grandmother." I looked down at the letter in my hand. "Don't let the uniform make you forget she's still my baby." The line knotted my throat every time. "She told him," I said. "The secretary. She told him not to forget I'm still her baby, like she was trying to protect me from him. From all of it." "She wasn't protecting you from him," Elias said. "She was reminding him you're human. That behind every operation and commendation there's someone's child. Someone who gets tired and scared and lonely. She wasn't diminishing you. She was insisting they see all of you." The idea settled around me like the rain, soft, persistent, sinking in slowly. We watched in silence as the grave was filled, and the funeral director placed a temporary marker at its head. The crowd began to thin, people drifting back toward their cars, offering hugs and casseroles and promises to visit that half of them would never keep. Uncle Victor lingered near the edge of the group, cigarette unlit in his hand, as if even he understood that smoking right next to fresh earth was a step too far. His gaze kept flicking toward me and Elias, curiosity wrestling with pride. "You going to go talk to him?" Elias asked. "I already did," I said. I apologized for the part I got wrong and called him out on the part he did. Right now, I think the best thing I can do is leave him alone with his thoughts and a pack of nicotine. "Fair," Elias said. "How's your mom?" "Devastated," I said. "Relieved it's over. Proud of me. Mad at him. All the things at once." He nodded. "Sounds about right." The last of the umbrellas closed. Engines rumbled to life. In minutes, the cemetery was mostly empty, just a handful of us still scattered among the stones. The rain had lightened to a mist that clung to the air rather than fell. "You staying in town tonight?" Elias asked. I shook my head. "There's a family gathering at my aunt's house this afternoon. Food, stories, probably some passive-aggressive commentary. Then I need to get back to base tomorrow to start final prep for Houston." "You sure you want to go back alone?" he asked. "I can drive you. Fly with you. Whatever you need." I paused, surprised at my own answer. I need to do this part myself. Say goodbye to her. Say goodbye to this version of home. Then I need you to meet me on the other side. Houston, he said. Houston, I confirmed. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll be there. And if at any point between now and then you change your mind about doing it alone, you call, no matter what time it is. Even if you're in a sim? He smiled. Especially if I'm in a sim. I reached out and let my fingers brush his hand. A small, hidden connection in a place where overt affection still felt too exposed. Thank you for coming, I said. Really, you didn't have to reroute your life every time mine catches fire. I don't, he agreed, but I want to stand next to you when it does. We walked back toward the cars together. My mother caught up with us, eyes flicking between us in that way that said she was updating mental files about our relationship. Elias, she said, offering a small smile. Thank you for being here. Of course, ma'am, he said. Your mother raised an incredible woman. She did, my mother said, looking at me. And she'd be bossing you around right now if she were here. Stop standing in the rain. You'll catch your death. Come inside and eat something. We all smiled, the shared image so vivid it almost felt like she was about to appear, waving a dish towel and scolding us for dripping on her floor. At my aunt's house, the afternoon unfolded in a blur of food and storytelling. Fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese, pound cake, every Grief food known to our family spread across the table like an edible hug. People talked about Grandma's laugh, her stubbornness, the way she'd sneak extra biscuits to grandkids when our parents weren't looking. The speech from the Secretary of Defense became its own story almost immediately. I heard different versions of it as I moved from room to room. Girl, I nearly fainted when that big-shot man stepped out that fancy car. I thought it was the mayor at first, but then somebody said that was the war man from TV. He called her a legend, a living legend. Can you imagine? Our little Mari. I felt eyes on me wherever I went, not in the old, skeptical way. Something more complicated now. People wanted to ask questions but didn't know which ones were safe. Some did anyway. So, what do you do exactly? A cousin asked over a plate of food. I work in operations and intelligence, I said. Planning missions. Coordinating moving pieces. Making sure the right people have the right information at the right time. Like in the movies? He pressed. You ever, shoot somebody? Not like the movies, I said. And most of what I do isn't about pulling triggers. It's about making sure we don't have to. He nodded, half satisfied, half disappointed. Later, in the living room, one of Grandma's oldest friends took my hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. I always knew you were special, she said. Not because of that uniform, because of the way you looked at people when they were talking, like you saw all the way through them and still smiled. Thank you, I said, throat tight. She bragged on you all the time, the woman continued. Not about the medals or the important folks you met, about how you never forgot to call her on her birthday, even from across the world. Don't let nobody rewrite that part, you hear? I hear, I said. By early evening, the house had emptied, leaving only immediate family and the kind of silence that comes after everyone's laughed themselves hoarse and cried themselves dry. I stood in Grandma's old bedroom, now repurposed as a guest room, looking at the empty space where her bed had been. The walls still bore faint outlines where her pictures had hung. A discolored rectangle here, a nail hole there. My mother stepped into the doorway. You okay? I turned, holding up the letter. How long did you know about this? She sighed. She showed it to me the day she got it. Said, they think they have my girl, but she's still mine. She wanted to tell you, but she worried it would make you, I don't know, self-conscious or careless. She didn't want you thinking anyone was watching but God." "That sounds like her," I said, smiling sadly. "She asked me to keep a copy," Mom added, pulling a second folded sheet from her pocket. "Said if anything ever happened to you, she wanted to make sure somebody knew you hadn't wasted your life." "That's dramatic," I said. "She was allowed," Mom replied. "She lived long enough to earn dramatic." We sat on the edge of the bed frame, the absence of the mattress making us lean in toward each other. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "Were you ever ashamed of me?" I asked. "For leaving? For wearing this?" I gestured at my uniform. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Ashamed?" "Baby, I was terrified. The news would say conflict and strike and incident, and I'd have to pretend they weren't talking about you. But ashamed? Never. Not for 1 second. Even when people said I'd sold out, that I'd abandoned the community." She shrugged. "People talk. That's what they do when they're too scared to move. Joining up wasn't my dream for you. I wanted you safe. Here. But it was your dream. And you were always going to be bigger than this block. I knew that since you started reading the encyclopedia for fun at 8 years old." I laughed, remembering the heavy volumes I'd lugged from the library, the way Grandma had teased, "You trying to carry the whole world in that backpack?" "Your uncle and them," Mom shook her head. "They needed you to stay small so they didn't have to feel the distance between their choices and yours. That's not your burden to carry." "I know," I said. "Or at least, I'm starting to." "Good," she said, "because you're about to go places none of us ever even dreamed of, literally." She nudged me with her shoulder. "You ready for that?" I thought of Houston, of the training, of the launches and the failures and the long hours of sim work, of the way my chest had tightened the first time I'd seen a rocket up close, not with fear, but with recognition. Like some part of me had been waiting my whole life to meet that machine. "I'm ready," I said, "or I will be." "Take her with you," Mom said, nodding toward the ceiling. "Not in a creepy urn way, in here." She tapped my chest. "Let her see what she helped you build." "I will," I said. That night, back in my childhood bedroom, I lay on the bed staring at the familiar cracks in the ceiling. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there as a kid still clung stubbornly to the paint in random constellations. Grandma had laughed when I put them up. "Always looking up, aren't you?" she'd said. "Just don't forget to look where you're walking to." I held her letter against my heart and let my mind drift. I saw myself in Houston, in a flight suit, patch on my shoulder, my name on my chest. I saw the faces of other candidates, some skeptical, some curious, some relieved to see someone who looked like me in the room. I saw long nights and early mornings, failures and small victories, bruises and breakthroughs. I saw a rocket. Not the exact mission, not the date, not the crew, just the shape of it. Tall, white, improbable against the sky. I saw myself strapped in, gloves on, helmet secure, the vibration of the engines building from a murmur to a roar. In the white room of my imagination, just before the hatch closed, I saw Grandma. Not as she'd been at the end, frail, tired, but as she'd been when I was 8 and begging for another bedtime story. Strong, sharp-eyed, a headscarf tied just so. She looked at my uniform, at the patch, at the harness. "Look at you," she said in my mind's ear, voice rich and amused. "My girl went and touched the sky." "Not yet," I whispered to the ceiling, "but I will." "I know," she replied. "Just remember, you don't have to prove anything up there. You already did down here." The next morning, as I packed my bag to head back to base, I tucked her letter into the same folder that held my orders. 2 documents, side by side, one from the government telling me where to go, One from my grandmother telling me who I was. At the door, my mother hugged me so long I thought she might never let go. Uncle Victor appeared on the sidewalk, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes bloodshot but clearer than the day before. "I heard you're leaving," he said gruffly. "Yeah," I said. "Base first, then Houston." He nodded, looking at a spot somewhere over my shoulder. You be careful out there, you hear?" "I will. And, look," he said, shifting his weight. About what I said. At the church. On the steps. I was mad. At the world. At me. At her dying. He swallowed. "I shouldn't have taken it out on you. That was wrong." I blinked. I hadn't expected this. Not today. Maybe not ever. "Thank you," I said simply. He cleared his throat. "You ain't no robot," he added, voice rough. "Whatever else you are, you ain't that." A small, genuine smile tugged at my mouth. "I'll take it." He hesitated, then stepped forward and pulled me into an awkward, one-armed hug that smelled like stale smoke and grief. It was clumsy and real and exactly what it needed to be. When he let go, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Go on then," he muttered. "Go be a legend or whatever they're calling you now." I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. "I'm just going to work, Uncle." "Yeah," he said. "Well, do it right." On the drive back to base, I watched the city recede in the rearview mirror. Brick buildings, corner stores, the church steeple peeking above the rooftops. The place that had built me and wounded me and loved me in its own imperfect way. At the gate, the guard saluted, and I saluted back, the gesture smoother than it had felt the first time I did it years ago. Inside the fence, the world shifted back into its familiar order. Barracks, hangars, runways, the distant shape of aircraft tails cutting into the sky. I parked, grabbed my bag, and headed toward my quarters. My phone buzzed. Elias. "Wheels down in Houston. They're ready for you when you are." I smiled. "Me. On my way. Had to say goodbye properly first." "Elias. She'd be proud. See you soon, Captain." I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked up. A plane arced overhead, leaving a white trail across the blue. It wasn't going to space, not yet. But it was moving, cutting through air that didn't care who was on board, just that the physics were right. That's all space ever was, I realized. Not a reward, not a stage. A place that would either accept or reject you based on whether you'd done the work, followed the laws written into matter itself. Uncle Victor's opinions wouldn't matter up there. Neither would the secretary's praise. Neither would the whispers, the sideways glances, the labels like quota or legend. Up there it would just be me, my crew, our training, and the unforgiving honesty of the void. I squared my shoulders, feeling Grandma's letter against my side, my rank on my collar, my own pulse steady in my ears. I wasn't going to space to prove my uncle wrong. I wasn't going to prove the secretary right. I was going, because a little black girl once lay on her back under plastic stars on a cracked bedroom ceiling and decided she wanted to see the real thing. And somewhere between the church steps, where I'd been called a joke, and the cemetery where a cabinet secretary had called me a living legend, I'd finally understood. Neither of those labels defined me. I did. So I took a breath, stepped forward, and walked toward the next launch point in a life that, for better or worse, was entirely my own.